Now, there was a powerful moment in the House of Commons earlier this week when, during that aftermath of the debate, or the non-debate, perhaps we should say, on Wednesday night, Thursday was a big day. There was controversy over the Speaker. There was controversy over the safety of MPs. And one of the most powerful interventions in the House of Commons came from Andrew Percy, the Member of Parliament for Brigg and Goole. This is what he had to say.
I was in Israel last week meeting with friends and survivors and hostage families, and I actually felt safer in Israel than I do in this country at this moment in time. And I have two reflections on that visit and on what happened yesterday. First of all, nobody in this House has any business, agency at all in telling the State of Israel where it is able to operate to seek to rescue hostages who are being raped by Islamic terrorists who hold them. Nobody has any business. Secondly, if we have a rerun of the debate we had yesterday, we will have exactly the same thing happen again, which is that members will not vote with their hearts because they are frightened and they are scared. And what do we expect? For months I've been standing up here talking about the people on our streets, demanding death to Jews, demanding jihad, demanding intifadas, as the police stand by and allow that to happen. Last night, a genocidal call for from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, was projected onto this building. That message says no Jew is welcome in the state of Israel or in that land.
Well, we're now joined by the Conservative MP for Brigg and Goole, Andrew Percy. Andrew, thank you very much for joining us on the show. For a lot of people, it will have been shocking to hear that you have felt safer in Israel, a country that is under threat from Hamas and other terrorist groups, than you do in Britain today. I've heard it from other Jewish people. I will say I have heard similar. Can you explain why that is?
Well, look, we've had Jews attacked in our streets. We've had Jewish businesses, Jewish community venues targeted. We've had Jews targeted online. We've had people attacked in Leicester Square for daring to speak Hebrew. And then, most shockingly of all, of course, we're subjected to these marches, every couple of weeks through central London and other cities, where open Jew hate is on display. Antisemitism, Jew hate is openly on display. So, people, it's not just Jewish people. A lot of, decent, ordinary people in this country feel intimidated by these mobs.
It's such an important point to make. What did you think of what the Speaker had to say about his justification for all of the shenanigans that went on in Parliament and the quite frankly ridiculous display that we saw on Wednesday evening? He said that he had to choose that Labour amendment in order that MPs could feel safe, that he had to change the rules of Parliament almost to avoid targeting by extremists.
Well, to avoid terrorism, he went as far as to say.
I mean, well, that's effectively it. It is to avoid terrorism, right? And, whatever we think about, I like the Speaker. I think he has our interests at heart, genuinely. The problem with the decision he made was it might have protected MPs on one side of the chamber or in one party, but it threw the rest of us under the bus, sadly. But it's a completely outrageous situation. But it's not the first time we've had this, which is that, members of Parliament are intimidated, threatened. And I had a conversation with one yesterday who I won't name, who told me that, they would have stayed away from the vote. Others have said this. And they explained to me the intimidation and the abuse they've been coming under, which means that they don't feel they can exercise their vote or their voice on this issue because they're frightened. And not just frightened of an electoral backlash. OK, politicians always, well, not always, but often cave to the fear of an electoral backlash, but a violent backlash. A backlash on them which will involve violence to them or their families. It's completely unacceptable.
Andrew, so what do we do about this? Because we have freedom of speech, we have freedom of protest, we have freedom of expression in this country. Yet, what we're seeing is Jewish people unable or they don't feel safe to go into our capital and other areas of the country on certain days of the week when these protests are taking place. How do we balance the different factions in our society, different causes?
Well, we have freedom of speech, but we don't have freedom of hate or freedom of hate speech. And the fact is, from day one, hopefully it's a minority at these marches, have chanted genocidal chants. Let's just remember the chant that was projected onto the the side of the House of Commons is a chant that was endorsed and used by Osama bin Laden and such folks as Saddam Hussein and, of course, the leaders of Hamas. So we shouldn't be allowing that. That has been chanted from day one. Never mind the calls for an intifada. Let's remember what happened in the last intifada in Israel. People walked into a pub and blew themselves up. Buses were blown up. Children were murdered. But yet the police have stood by while people marched through our streets calling for a socialist intifada. I mean, what utter nonsense. And of course, people have been in open display of the Houthis, plus all sorts of other kinds of anti-Semitic imagery. And the police have stood by largely, and they've allowed people to chant for genocide. If this has been nipped in the bud from the beginning, we may not be in this position, but it's emboldened these people.
So, Andrew, do you agree with the words of Suella Braverman, who was very critical of the police? It's one of the reasons she was got rid of as Home Secretary. She was critical of the operational independence of the police over this issue and described all of these marches as hate marches. She's had more words today. Is she right with her forthright view on this?
Well, I actually referred to them as marches of hate, before the former Home Secretary did, actually, in one of my early interventions, because I've been raising this from the very beginning. But that's exactly what they are for a minority of people who attend those marches. It's very clear. Look, we've had open chanting for jihad, open support for Islamist terrorist organisations. So they are, hopefully it's a minority, but they are happening and it hasn't been tackled. And that is a really dangerous point for our democracy. And it's okay, where everybody's saying it's wrong, everyone's saying MPs mustn't be subjected to this. I haven't heard a single change or explanation for how we're going to prevent it happening again, because it will happen on other issues as these people are emboldened now.
Andrew, I think you're absolutely right to point out that there are extremist voices on these marches, but a lot of people would say that there are many people going on these marches who are simply concerned about the loss of life in Gaza and the deaths of children and the absolute carnage that we're seeing. How can you ban those types of people who are just concerned about the loss of life?
Well, it would be nice if they turned up then to express their opposition to the continued governance by Hamas then, who are the people who are subjecting Gazans to what is happening at the moment. But also, if I started and I found myself on a march on a cause I believed in, and I looked around at myself and I happened to find myself with a bunch of neo-Nazis or neo-fascists, I might consider whether or not this is the place for me to express those genuinely held concerns on whatever particular issue it is. So, by your friends be judged, right? If you are prepared to turn up to march week after week after week, where there are genocidal chants, anti-Semitic signs, then this is not the place you should be expressing what is, doubtless for many people, a genuine concern about the humanitarian situation and the conflict. But maybe you should, find a different venue or a different way of expressing that concern, not stand alongside people who have called for the open murder of Jews.
So presumably there needs to be tougher policing on these marches then, or perhaps a greater sense of awareness. I remember it was only last Saturday that Jeremy Corbyn was pictured at the front of one of these marches, and it was just over his left shoulder where you could see the most outrageous trope of a Jewish baby sucking on a bottle full of blood being held by the United States Statue of Liberty. The oldest form of hatred, of blood libel there, just over the shoulder of Jeremy Corbyn, clearly in a picture. And no one seemed to notice or perhaps even mind on that march.
Well, I think with that particular individual, it's not the first time he's found himself in close proximity to such signs, I believe, in some Facebook groups. But let's leave him out of it. The fact is that there have also been Labour MPs who've attended these marches and have spoken at these marches. And that is something they should consider very carefully, because it is giving an endorsement to marches that lots of people in the Jewish community and beyond actually feel very intimidated and very frightened by. My understanding of race and religious hatred laws is that the police should approach it from the view of the victim. And we have victims here saying, I feel frightened, I feel scared to be in central London as a Jew, because, Jews have been attacked by some of the protesters, verbally attacked at the very least, on their way to these marches. And I thought the police were meant to come in from the point of view of the victim here, and that doesn't appear to be the case. It's almost on some occasions if the Met Police have been the PR arm of some of these protests.
Yes, and how many Jewish people are hiding their Star of David or taking off their kippah every time they go in central London? Thank you very much indeed for your time, Andrew Percy, Conservative MP for Brigg and Gaul.
Yeah, really, really powerful. That I mean, it's not the first time that I've heard someone Jewish say that I feel safer in Israel, a country that is under constant threat, than they do in this country. But to hear it on the green benches so powerfully yesterday in Parliament was a real moment.